I still remember the smell of that lakeside bistro, cedar and lemon and overpriced cologne, the kind of place where the menus don't have prices and the waitstaff hover just out of earshot, appearing only when you need them like some kind of culinary magic trick. It wasn't our usual meeting spot. That should have been my first clue. Greg had texted me that morning. Casual lunch at Harborview, 1 p.m. Want to discuss some exciting developments. The message ended with one of those little thumbs up emojis that always felt hollow coming from him. In 19 years at Brookwell Marine Systems, I'd never once been invited to Harborview by upper management. Budget meetings happened over sandwiches in the conference room. Strategy sessions were coffee and donuts. Harborview was where they took clients they wanted to impress, not the director of global supply chain. But there I was, straightening my tie in the restaurant bathroom, checking my teeth for spinach that wasn't there. 57 years old and still caring what people thought. Still believing after all these years that merit mattered more than connections. I joined Brookwell in 2006, back when it was still run by old Howard Brookwell himself. The company was bleeding money through procurement inefficiencies, paying premium for basic components, losing track of inventory, double ordering specialized parts that would sit gathering dust. Howard was a brilliant engineer, but a terrible businessman. His ships were technological marvels that cost too much to build and shipped months behind schedule. "I need someone who can fix this mess," he told me during my interview, gesturing to a war room of spreadsheets and purchase orders pinned to corkboards. "Someone who understands that in this business, a day late is $1 million lost." I'd spent the previous decade building inventory management systems for manufacturing outfits across 3 continents. My specialty was maritime, the complex dance of thousands of components arriving from dozens of countries, all needing to converge at precisely the right moment. One delayed shipment could idle 100 workers and cost thousands in overtime once the parts finally arrived. "I can build you something better," I told Howard. "A system that anticipates problems before they happen." I called it the Mariner Platform, an integrated supply chain ecosystem that could track thousands of components across dozens of suppliers with near-perfect accuracy. I didn't know it then, but that conversation would change everything. For me, for Brookwell, and eventually, for Greg Firth's carefully manicured career trajectory. But on that sunny Tuesday at Harborview, I was still just Derrick Matheson, the guy who kept the ships sailing on time and on budget, the invisible engine that powered Howard's vision long after he was gone. Greg was already seated when I arrived, his back to the water, face haloed by the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Classic power move. Make your opponent squint while you remain in shadow. I'd read the same management books he had. "Derrick, great to see you outside those fluorescent office lights." He stood and clapped me on the shoulder, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "I took the liberty of ordering us some wine. Hope you like Pinot Noir." "I don't actually. I'm more of a bourbon man myself." But I smiled and nodded, playing along with whatever game we were playing. "Special occasion?" "You could say that." Greg swirled his wine, studying the legs that formed along the glass. "Brookwell is entering a new chapter. The board and I have been discussing some structural changes." My stomach tightened. In corporate speak, structural changes rarely meant anything good for the people who actually made things work. "I've always been open to change," I said carefully. "What kind of restructuring are we looking at?" The waiter appeared with 2 house salads, buying Greg a moment to collect his thoughts, or perhaps to steal his nerve. I noticed he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "We're bringing in some new blood, young talent, people who can help us modernize our approach to global logistics." He took a careful bite of his salad, chewing thoroughly before continuing. "The board feels, and I agree, that we need to pivot toward more agile methodologies." I nodded slowly, keeping my face neutral. "Agile is good. I've been implementing elements of that in our JIT inventory system for years now. Yes, your system. Greg's smile tightened slightly. That's actually part of what I wanted to discuss. And there it was, the real reason for the lakeside lunch, the wine, the careful language about new chapters. I'd seen it happen to others over the years. The careful staging of a public dismissal, somewhere just private enough to avoid a scene, just public enough to prevent one. "Let me save you some time, Greg," I said, setting down my fork. "You're letting me go." His eyes widened slightly, then settled into something resembling sympathy. Practiced sympathy. "I wouldn't put it that way. We're restructuring your department, creating a new position that combines your role with digital transformation. And I'm not being considered for this new position. We feel that fresh perspectives would benefit." "Who's taking over? Someone from inside the company?" I already knew the answer, but I wanted to hear him say it. Greg cleared his throat. "Travis Brookwell will be stepping in as Chief Supply Chain Officer. He's got an MBA from Wharton and some innovative ideas about..." Travis. I couldn't help but laugh. Howard's nephew. The kid who couldn't get through a summer internship without crashing the email server. Twice. He's not a kid anymore, Derrick. He's 34 and has been working at McKinsey for the past 5 years. As a consultant, not managing actual supply chains for actual ships that actually need to sail. I could feel heat rising in my face, but forced myself to remain calm. Those innovative ideas won't mean much when you've got 3 vessels stuck in dry dock because he ordered the wrong gauge of specialty steel. Greg's expression hardened. "The decision has been made. The board voted unanimously yesterday." I sat back, letting the information settle over me like a cold wave. 19 years. Nearly 2 decades of my life given to this company. I'd missed my daughter's college graduation because of a logistics emergency in Singapore. Worked through pneumonia during the pandemic to keep our supplies flowing when global shipping had ground to a halt. Built systems that saved Brookwell millions. Systems that no one else fully understood. Systems that I had created. Systems that I owned. A small, dangerous thought flickered in the back of my mind. I pushed it away for the moment. "When?" I asked simply. "End of day. We'll announce the transition tomorrow morning." Greg reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "We're offering 6 months severance, continued health benefits through the end of the year, and a letter of recommendation highlighting your contributions." 6 months severance, after 19 years. I did the math in my head. About $82,000 before taxes. It wasn't nothing, but it was a fraction of my true value to the company. And my system, the Mariner platform. Travis will oversee the transition. We've already contracted with an outside firm to ensure continuity. They'll be reaching out to get the necessary documentation and access codes. I nodded slowly, my mind racing ahead to what would happen when that outside firm started digging into my code. There's something you should know about me. Something that Howard Brookwell understood, but that Greg and the board had apparently forgotten. Before joining Brookwell full-time, I was an independent contractor. I built that initial inventory system on my own time, with my own resources, operating under my own LLC, Matheson Technical Solutions. When Howard hired me, we had a handshake agreement that Brookwell could use my system as long as I was employed there. But I never signed over the intellectual property rights, never transferred ownership of the code, the architecture, or the custom algorithms that made Brookwell's supply chain the envy of the industry. I'd offered to sell it to them outright several times over the years, but the company had balked at the price tag. Why buy what they were already using for free? I could have reminded Greg of this oversight. Could have warned him that terminating me meant losing access to the proprietary systems that kept their global operations running. But as I looked at him across that table, at his expensive haircut and practiced smile, I decided to accept the envelope instead. "I appreciate the package," I said, slipping it into my jacket pocket without looking inside. "I assume you'll want my keycard and credentials today." Greg seemed relieved, probably having expected tears or protests or threats. "Yes, though we'll need you to do a proper handoff with Travis. You've got access to our vendor database and—" "Of course," I said smoothly. "I'll make sure everything transitions smoothly." We finished our lunch in awkward silence. I declined dessert and signed the check that Greg pushed toward me, his final power move. Make the man you're firing pay for his own farewell meal. I walked out of Harborview with my head high and my mind already turning toward what would come next. Not just for me, but for Brookwell Marine Systems and their shiny new Chief Supply Chain Officer. The funny thing about specialized knowledge is that it looks like magic to the uninitiated. For years, I'd been the wizard behind the curtain, making impossible logistics work with a few keystrokes. No one had bothered to look at how the magic was performed, because the results spoke for themselves. Ships launched on time, parts arrived when needed. Costs stayed under budget. But that magic was about to disappear. I drove home in a daze that afternoon, my mind cycling between disbelief, anger, and, surprisingly, a kind of perverse excitement. For nearly 2 decades, I'd been solving everyone else's problems. Now I had the freedom to solve my own. My wife Janet was still at work when I got home. She's a hospital administrator, the organized one in our relationship. I poured myself that bourbon I'd been craving, sat down at my home office desk, and began making lists. People to call, resources to gather, steps to take. First on the list, contact my old friend Meera Patel at Jameson & Burke, the law firm that had helped me set up my LLC back in 2005. I needed to verify that my original contract with Brookwell was as airtight as I remembered. "Oh, it's solid," Meera confirmed after reviewing the paperwork I'd emailed over. "You granted them a license to use your software while you were employed there. Now that they've terminated you, that license expires. What about the modifications I've made since joining? The updates to the original system. Those would typically belong to your employer, but..." She paused, reading further. "Did you ever sign Brookwell's standard IP agreement when you converted from contractor to employee?" I smiled into my bourbon. Howard never asked me to, and I never volunteered. I heard Meera's surprised laugh through the phone. "Well then, according to these documents, you own all of it, the original system and every improvement you've made since. They've been operating on borrowed code for almost 20 years. Something loosened in my chest, a knot of uncertainty giving way to the calm clarity of knowing I still held the cards. Not all of them, but enough. "How should I proceed?" I asked. "Carefully," Meera advised. "Give them the handoff they've asked for. Don't mention the IP issue unless they bring it up. Once you're officially terminated, we'll send a formal letter notifying them that their license to use your software has expired. We'll offer to negotiate a new licensing agreement at market rates. And if they refuse, then they'll be in violation of your copyright. We can seek an injunction preventing them from using your system, but let's hope it doesn't come to that." I spent the rest of the evening planning my next moves. Janet came home around 7, took one look at my face, and knew something was wrong. "They fired you," she said. Not a question. I nodded, pouring her a glass of wine. Replaced me with Howard's nephew. "That intern who couldn't even figure out how to work the coffee machine?" Janet asked incredulously. Despite everything, I laughed. Janet had never been one to mince words. It was one of the many things I loved about her. The very same. Now he's Chief Supply Chain Officer with a fancy MBA and big ideas about digital transformation. Janet took a long sip of her wine. "So what are you going to do?" I told her about my conversation with Meera. about the IP rights I still held, about the leverage I had that Greg and the board didn't realize. "You could make them pay," she said thoughtfully. "Negotiate a licensing deal worth millions." I could. I swirled the bourbon in my glass. Or I could make them understand exactly what they've thrown away. "Derrick." Janet's voice held a note of warning. She knew me too well, knew the calculating look that must have been in my eyes. "Nothing illegal," I assured her. "Nothing that violates any agreement or confidentiality. Just a lesson in consequences." The next morning, I arrived at Brookwell for what would be my final day. I wore my best suit, charcoal grey with subtle pinstripes, a power tie, cufflinks Janet had given me for our anniversary. If I was going out, I was going out looking like the executive they'd decided they could do without. My team was already gathered in the conference room when I arrived. 15 people, most of whom had worked with me for years. All of them looked confused, uncertain. News travels fast in corporate environments, even when it's not officially announced. "I'm sure you've heard rumors." I began without preamble. "Yes, today is my last day at Brookwell. Starting tomorrow, Travis Brookwell will be taking over as Chief Supply Chain Officer." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Simone, my deputy director, spoke up first. "This is bullshit, Derrick. No one knows our systems like you do." I held up a hand to quiet the growing protests. "I appreciate the support, but the decision has been made. What matters now is ensuring a smooth transition for all of you." I spent the next hour outlining what they could expect in the coming weeks. I was honest without being alarmist, supportive without undermining the company that had just let me go. These people were my colleagues, my friends. I wouldn't use them as pawns in whatever game was about to unfold. After the meeting, I returned to my office to find Travis waiting for me, lounging in one of my visitor chairs like he already owned the place. He'd filled out since I'd last seen him, less of the gangly intern, more corporate Polish. But the smug entitlement in his eyes was exactly the same. "Derrick, great to see you again." He stood and extended his hand. I shook it firmly, noting the softness of his palm. The hands of someone who'd never had to get dirty fixing a real problem. "Congratulations on the promotion," I said evenly. "Thanks, man. I'm really excited about the opportunity. I've got some big plans for modernizing our approach." I gestured for him to sit, taking my place behind the desk for one of the last times. "I'm sure you do. I've prepared a transition document outlining our major vendors, current projects, and outstanding issues." Travis waved a hand dismissively. "I appreciate that, but I've already reviewed the department's documentation. I'm more interested in getting access to the inventory management system. Greg tells me you're the only one with full admin rights." And there it was. The reason Travis was here, being polite to the man he was replacing. He needed what I had. "That's correct," I said. "For security reasons, we've kept the highest level access limited. I can set you up with an admin account today." "Perfect." Travis leaned forward eagerly. "And maybe you could walk me through how it all works? The architecture, the customizations, the special sauce that makes it tick?" I smiled thinly. "We can certainly cover the basics, but the system has evolved over nearly 2 decades. It would take months to explain all its nuances." Right. Travis nodded. "Well, I'm a quick study. And we've got that outside firm coming in to document everything. Bit Solutions, I think they're called." "Bit Solutions is an excellent choice," I lied. In reality, they were a mid-tier consulting outfit known for overcharging and under-delivering. I'll make sure they have what they need. We spent the next 3 hours going through the system's main functions. I showed Travis how to generate reports, check inventory levels, and approve purchase orders. Standard user functions that any competent administrator could figure out. But I carefully avoided explaining the proprietary algorithms that made the system truly special. The predictive ordering that anticipated supply chain disruptions, the custom routing that optimized shipping costs, the vendor scoring system that had saved Brookwell millions over the years. By late afternoon, I'd cleared out my personal belongings, handed Travis a set of credentials that would give him surface-level access to the system, and said my goodbyes to the team. Greg made a brief appearance, shaking my hand stiffly and wishing me well in my future endeavors. As I walked out of the building for the last time, keycards surrendered to security, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, certainly, betrayal, but also relief. And beneath it all, a quiet certainty that this wasn't the end of my story with Brookwell Marine Systems. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. I sat in my car in the parking garage for nearly an hour, staring at the small cardboard box containing 19 years of my professional life. A few framed photos, a coffee mug my team had given me on my 50th birthday, a thumb drive with personal files, all that remained from 2 decades of dedication. My throat tightened and my hands trembled on the steering wheel as the full reality crashed down on me. I'd been discarded, replaced, deemed obsolete by people who had no idea what I'd built. For one terrible moment, I wondered if they were right. If at 57, my best years were behind me. I spent the next 2 weeks strategically planning my next move. I registered a new company, Meridian Supply Chain Solutions, and began reconnecting with industry contacts. My reputation in maritime supply chain circles opened doors immediately. Meanwhile, I monitored Brookwell remotely as Travis and his consultants struggled with the Mariner platform. On day 15, Simone called in a panic. "Everything's falling apart," she said. "Travis overrode the system's recommendations for the Maersk project, ordered from that blacklisted Malaysian supplier." "Let me guess," I said. 15% cheaper? Exactly. Now half the shipment is rejected, deliveries are delayed, and we're facing penalties. I expressed sympathy, but offered no solutions. This wasn't my problem anymore. "We need you back, Derrick. This is madness." "I appreciate that, Simone, but I'm exploring new opportunities now." After we hung up, I reached out to Mira. It was time for the next phase. In the weeks that followed, I kept tabs on Brookwell through system logs and occasional messages from concerned team members. The Mariner platform was showing signs of strain under inexperienced management, warnings being ignored, automated protocols being manually overridden, custom algorithms being misunderstood. It was like watching a precision instrument being used as a hammer. Then, exactly 3 weeks after my termination, the letter from Jameson and Burke arrived on Greg's desk. Formal, legally precise, and devastating in its implications. This letter serves as notice that the license granted to Brookwell Marine Systems to use the proprietary Mariner platform inventory management system created and owned by Matheson Technical Solutions has expired following the termination of Derrick Matheson's employment. Continued use of this system constitutes copyright infringement. We are prepared to negotiate a new licensing agreement at market rates. Greg called me personally the next day. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. "It's exactly what it appears to be," I replied calmly. "A notification that Brookwell no longer has legal permission to use my software." "Your software? That system was developed while you were employed by Brookwell." "Actually, no. It was developed while I was an independent contractor. I was then hired as an employee, but I never transferred ownership of the intellectual property. Your legal department can confirm this if they review my original contracts." Silence on the line as Greg absorbed this. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, calculating the cost of fighting me versus the cost of paying for a license. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "Market rate for enterprise-level supply chain management software of this complexity." "My lawyer can provide the details." but we're looking at approximately $2.5 million per year for full Mariner platform access, plus ongoing support fees. Greg made a choking sound. That's extortion. That's capitalism, I corrected him. You made a business decision to terminate my employment. I'm making a business decision to charge for the use of my intellectual property. The system has saved Brookwell at least 10 times that amount annually for the past decade. I need to discuss this with the board. Of course. In the meantime, you have 3 days to either sign a licensing agreement or cease using my software. After that, I'll be forced to pursue legal remedies. I hung up feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and regret. I'd never wanted it to come to this. For 19 years, I'd been a loyal employee, giving Brookwell far more than they had paid me for. All I'd wanted in return was respect for my contributions and a seat at the table I'd helped build. But they'd shown me what they thought I was worth. 6 months severance and an awkward lunch. Now I was demonstrating my actual market value. The next 72 hours were a flurry of activity. Greg called twice more, first threatening legal action, then attempting to negotiate the licensing fee down to a fraction of what I'd asked. I held firm. Mira fielded calls from Brookwell's legal team, patiently explaining the ironclad nature of my ownership claims. Meanwhile, I received an interesting call from Cameron Westfield, CEO of Ocean Tech Industries, one of Brookwell's main competitors. Word is you're available for consulting, Cameron said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. We've been admirers of Brookwell's supply chain efficiency for years, wondering if you might share some insights. I chose my words carefully. I'm bound by confidentiality regarding specific Brookwell operations, but my expertise in maritime supply chain optimization is certainly available to the right partner. Understood. How about we meet for lunch next week? Discuss how your general expertise might benefit Ocean Tech. That lunch turned into a 6-month consulting contract worth $350,000. I would help Ocean Tech build their own custom inventory management system. Not a copy of Brookwell's, but something better that incorporated all I'd learned over 2 decades in the industry. 3 days after my ultimatum to Greg, Brookwell signed the licensing agreement. $2.5 million annually for continued use of the Mariner platform, plus consulting fees for updates and maintenance. I provided them with the bare minimum required by our agreement: functional access to the system and basic support. The premium features, the predictive analytics, the custom optimizations, would require additional fees and personal consulting time. Time I was now spending with Ocean Tech and 2 other former Brookwell competitors who had reached out. 6 months after my termination, Meridian Supply Chain Solutions had grown from a one-man operation to a boutique consulting firm with 8 employees, including Simone and 3 others who had left Brookwell. We were generating 7-figure revenue, working with industry leaders across 4 continents, and developing next-generation supply chain software. Brookwell was struggling. Their stock had dropped 23% after 2 consecutive quarters of missed deliveries and cost overruns. Industry publications wrote about their mysterious decline, while longtime customers jumped ship to competitors, many now my clients. 1 year to the day after that fateful lunch at Harborview, Elizabeth Brookwell called. She'd inherited her father's controlling interest, but had remained a silent partner, until now. The board has asked for Greg's resignation, she told me. Travis is being reassigned to regional sales. We'd like to talk to you about coming back. I looked out over the harbor from my new office in a restored waterfront building. For the first time in my career, I was truly working on my own terms. I'd rediscovered the joy in solving complex problems, not for someone else's bottom line, but because they were intellectually fascinating. I'm flattered, I said, but I've moved on. Meridian is doing well. We're prepared to offer a significant equity position, Elizabeth continued, and complete autonomy over supply chain operations. I thought about it. There was a certain poetic justice in returning triumphantly. But I didn't need Brookwell anymore. I'd built something better. I can't come back as an employee, I finally said. But Meridian would be open to a strategic partnership. We could help Brookwell rebuild its supply chain excellence. At what cost? Elizabeth asked, already knowing the answer. Market rates, I replied with a small smile. For expertise of this caliber. We finalized the deal a month later. Meridian would provide supply chain consulting to Brookwell for 3 years at $4.8 million annually. And I insisted that Simone, who had been the first to leave Brookwell and join me, risking her own career out of loyalty to our shared principles, would lead the implementation team. She deserved that recognition after standing by me when it mattered. But the real victory wasn't professional. It was personal. For the first time in decades, I was present for my life. I took Janet on that Mediterranean cruise we'd postponed 4 times for Brookwell emergencies. I coached my grandson's Little League team on weekends instead of answering crisis calls. I started a mentorship program for supply chain students at the local community college, helping the next generation avoid the mistakes I'd made. As I reflect on the journey from that lakeside lunch to where I am today, I'm struck by how a moment of professional betrayal became the catalyst for the most successful chapter of my career. I'd spent decades building someone else's dream, only to discover that the real value was in what I knew, what I could create, what I alone could provide. The lesson here isn't about revenge, though I won't deny the satisfaction of watching Travis and Greg reap what they'd sown. It's about understanding your true worth and protecting what you create. If you're watching this, take a moment to consider what intellectual property you might have created that you don't fully own. That app you developed on weekends. That process you invented to solve a workplace problem. That specialized knowledge everyone relies on but takes for granted. Document everything. Understand your contracts. Know what you own and what you've signed away. Because in today's economy, intellectual property is often the most valuable asset you have, whether your employer recognizes it or not. And always get those agreements in writing. A handshake might be gentleman's business, but a signature is smart business. Your knowledge has value. Own it. Protect it. Profit from it. And if you're sitting on something brilliant that your company's taking for granted, start protecting it today. Because you never know when your backup plan becomes your breakthrough. If you found value in this story, make sure to hit subscribe and follow Goldprint for more real-life lessons in business, finance, and professional growth. Drop a comment below sharing your own experience with workplace betrayal or intellectual property disputes. I read every comment and respond to as many as I can.